when I took it, it was my first, it was my first offer ever, and it was the lead in this feature. So it was fun to do, and I wasn't hesitant about taking it.
In 1982, Phoebe Cates became America's fantasy. By 1994, she vanished. What happened in between was darker than anyone realized. She started filming nude scenes at 17 in the Israeli desert. By 20, she had starred in 5 projects built around her body, not her talent. Then she married a man 16 years older, had 2 kids, and made a choice that shocked Hollywood. For 36 years, she's lived a life most people wouldn't believe. Today, she's 62, and when you see her walking through Manhattan, you won't recognize the woman who once stopped time in a swimming pool. Phoebe Cates was born Phoebe Bell Cates on July 16, 1963, at New York Hospital in Manhattan, and that detail matters because she arrived right in the middle of the world her family already knew how to run. Her father was a Broadway producer and an early television pioneer who worked on game shows like The $64,000 Question. And then there was her uncle, who went on to produce multiple Academy Awards telecasts in the 1970s and 1980s. So, on the outside, it looks like a clean story of a New York Jewish entertainment family. But her background carried another layer. Even before she became a teenager, she was already positioned like an heir to a working New York entertainment dynasty, whether she asked for it or not. So, she grew up with the city's noise in her ears. But more than that, she grew up inside the Manhattan arts pipeline that fed stage, television, and film. She attended Miss Hewitt's School, an elite Upper East Side girls' school built for families that were wealthy, connected, and already comfortable around influence. Then she transferred to the Professional Children's School, a place designed for young performers whose schedules had to bend around auditions and rehearsals instead of sports practice. That one change tells you everything. In those hallways, she was surrounded by kids who were already doing commercials and Broadway matinees, while other kids their age were thinking about clubs after school. In that environment, having a producer father and an Oscar show uncle did not feel like a miracle. It felt like a family trade, something you stepped into if you could keep up. And for a while, she did not even aim for acting first. She aimed for ballet. By age 10, she was focused so intensely that she moved into the Juilliard orbit, training in advanced New York programs that fed dancers toward the top schools. She received a scholarship to the School of American Ballet, the official school of New York City Ballet, and she trained seriously for about 3.5 years. Teachers did not treat her like a casual student. They looked at her like someone who could end up in a professional company if her body stayed strong. Then her body did not stay strong. Around age 14, she suffered a serious knee injury that forced her to stop dancing completely. Just like that, the path she spent most of her childhood building snapped in half. Later, she would talk about that moment like it took away her first artistic identity. And when you lose something like that at 14, you do not just miss the craft. You miss the future you thought was already yours. That loss also helps explain why she was willing later to take risks that made her uncomfortable. Because drifting in New York's competitive arts world felt even scarier than jumping into something new. Money started coming in from a place that sounded almost normal. Babysitting for family friends. But even that turned into a doorway, because it led directly to modeling offers. By age 10, she was already appearing in teen magazines. Then the pace picked up. By 14, she was on the cover of 17, and between 1979 and 1980, she landed the 17 cover 4 times, beginning with the April 1979 issue, with editorial spreads inside too. Her face also appeared on Elle, British Vogue, and Andy Warhol's Interview. So before she even turned 17, she already had an international presence. Yet the strange part, is what she admitted later. She disliked the work. She described shoots as the same thing, over and over. She said she kept modeling solely for the money. That is a blunt confession for someone who was, on paper, one of the most visible teen models in America at that time. Then the teenage years pulled her into a different kind of spotlight. In the late 1970s, she did not just hear about New York nightlife, she stepped into it. Through Andy Warhol, a family friend, she went to Studio 54 for the first time in 1979. That same year, she met her then-boyfriend, Stavros Myrios, and started living more independently in Greenwich Village. And Studio 54 was not just a party. It was a crowded room where careers could be redirected in a single night. It was infamous for the strict door, the cocaine-filled balcony, and tables packed with rock stars and designers. But hidden inside that chaos was something else. Artists, photographers, agents, people watching faces and deciding who could move from still photos to moving images. In those rooms, someone eventually pointed her away from magazine covers and toward screen tests, and that shift moved fast. It led, within a few years, to nude scenes in Paradise, shot in Israel in 1981 when she was 17, and then to global sexualization after Fast Times at Ridgemont High in 1982. Paradise, released in the United States on March 12, 1982, arrived with a very specific intention. It was marketed as a desert answer to The Blue Lagoon from 1980. Same core idea. Two beautiful teens stranded in an exotic, isolated world where innocence slowly turns erotic. Set in 1823, it follows Sarah, played by Cates, and David, played by Willie Ames, after they are separated from a caravan in the Middle East. They discover survival and sex together among oases, waterfalls, and danger. The posters and VHS art did not sell her as a newcomer actress. They sold her as a semi-nude fantasy object, putting her in a sheer white dress and pushing the tagline, "A bit beyond love." It was not subtle. It was a clear step further than the softer presentation people associated with Blue Lagoon. And before she even had a real screen reputation, that copycat positioning stamped her as a new Brooke Shields and locked her into the teen sex symbol lane before anyone had a chance to see what else she could do. What made it heavier was how young she was while it happened. Paradise was filmed in 1981, meaning she was about 17 during production, and only just 18 when audiences first saw her nude on screen. And even at that age, she was dealing with contract clauses that treated full frontal and topless scenes like core deliverables, not optional choices. Later, in comments quoted on IMDb, she said it plainly. She was only 17 when she did the nude scenes in Paradise, and they were serious and more difficult because they were not easily justified. That one line explains the trap. Executives looked at her modeling history, the covers, the visibility, and they gambled that selling her body would sell the film. So the message to an 18-year-old first-timer became simple and cruel. Your value is measurable, not in training, not in timing, in skin. And the location made it even more disorienting. Paradise was shot largely in Israeli and North African desert settings, far from the Manhattan world she knew. She went from climate-controlled photo shoots to long days under burning sun, often in wet, translucent costumes, with sand everywhere and limited privacy, while filming intimate scenes with minimal clothing. The camera saw beauty, waterfalls, rocky outcrops, oasis light. But the reality was slippery surfaces, cold water at dawn, heat later in the day, and nowhere to truly hide between takes. For a teenager whose serious training happened in rehearsal rooms, that isolated adult environment could turn the idea of a screen sexual awakening into something far harsher than audiences understood. When the movie hit in 1982, critics did not treat it gently. Reviews in the United States called it a bargain basement Blue Lagoon and an exploitative travelogue, saying its main purpose was to show the two leads undressing in slow motion rather than tell a real story. Later write-ups still describe it mostly through its sexually charged content and copycat concept, with little praise for acting or direction. Yet the marketing still did its job. Posters, TV spots, VHS boxes promising more than Blue Lagoon. Curiosity kept it alive, and it became a minor early 1980s cable staple, especially late at night. So she learned a hard lesson early, before age 20. Buzz can grow because something is condemned. Ratings can spike because people want to stare. Respect is not always what powers the machine. That is what made The Split so painful, because she did not come from nowhere. Before Paradise, she had already taken Juilliard dance classes for 3.5 years, starting at age 10. She trained with respected acting teachers like Robert Ravan at the Actors Circle and Alice Spivak at HB Studios. Her resume looked like a serious stage hopeful, not a pin-up. But early 1980s coverage rarely leaned into that. Instead, it fixated on nudity. Paradise. Private School in 1983, the topless moment in Fast Times. Stories were often illustrated with swimsuit or semi-nude stills instead of rehearsal or theater shots. Even later, career summaries kept labeling her as a cinematic object of desire tied to sexually charged roles. That meant the public image stayed frozen around age 19, even as she tried to grow past it. Then Fast Times at Ridgemont High arrived and made everything louder. Universal released it on August 13, 1982. Phoebe Cates was 19, and her performance as Linda Barrett hit like a cultural switch being flipped. The script came from Cameron Crowe's undercover year at Claremont High School in San Diego, and Amy Heckerling shot the film on a modest budget of around $4 to $5 million. It became a sleeper hit that later crossed $27 million in the United States. On screen, Linda acts confident, like the friend who knows everything. She gives advice to Jennifer Jason Leigh's Stacy with a calm voice and a straight face. But the writing also hints that Linda's bravado is partly a mask, especially when her own love life sounds more like fantasy than experience. That detail matters because it means Linda was not supposed to be a simple fantasy. She was also a teen trying to sound older than she felt. The timing of it all was fast. She landed Fast Times the same year she shot Paradise. So she went from a desert romance in Israel to a California high school comedy in just months. Crowe's book Fast Times at Ridgemont High, a true story, came out in 1981, and Heckerling cast Cates after seeing how she could play both authority and insecurity in early readings. Production happened mainly in late 1981 around Los Angeles, using real malls and schools to keep the tone grounded. And even though most of the cast was in their late teens or early 20s, Cates was pushed into the role of the experienced one, even though in real life she was barely older than Leigh. That gap between her age and Linda's supposed wisdom is part of why the performance can still feel uncomfortably real. By July 1983, the timing could not have been more loaded. Less than a year earlier, Fast Times at Ridgemont High had turned Phoebe Cates into a fixation, freezing her in the public mind as a teenage fantasy rather than a young actress still figuring herself out. Private School arrived right inside that moment. She was only 19 turning 20 when she played Christine Ramsey, a student at a wealthy all-girls academy where the story barely paused for character and instead circled around spying boys, shower scenes, stolen underwear, and dorm jokes that existed mostly to push skin onto the screen. It was sold directly into the early 1980s teen sex wave that had already made Porky's a hit in 1981 and would soon turn risky business into a phenomenon in 1983. Critics noticed. Many complained the movie leaned more on topless moments than actual humor. Cates even recorded 2 songs for the soundtrack, Just One Touch and How Do I Let You Know? Yet reviews barely mentioned her voice. What they talked about instead were the shower scenes. The message was clear, even if no one said it out loud. That message only grew louder once the marketing machine took over. Private school posters and VHS covers pushed her body forward and pushed her face back. Tight swimsuits, locker room undressing shots, cropped images that reduced her to legs, chest, and bare skin. It was not subtle. It was a repeat of the slow-motion red bikini moment from Fast Times, an image that by 1983 had already been replayed endlessly on cable TV, in magazines, and on video store walls. For casting directors, these visuals became shorthand. If you needed nudity, a fantasy beat, or a shower scene, you hired Phoebe Cates. If you needed layers, silence followed. Even decades later, DVD covers kept recycling the same swimsuit-heavy imagery long after she had stopped acting altogether. By the time she was not even 21, the exposure was relentless. Between 1982 and 1984, she appeared in at least 5 projects that leaned heavily into erotic or teasing territory. Paradise in 1982, Fast Times at Ridgemont High that same year, Private School in 1983, Baby Sister in 1983, then Lace in 1984. Paradise was filmed when she was around 17 or 18 and required full frontal nudity, selling itself openly as a low-budget echo of the Blue Lagoon with desert island imagery and suggestive posters. Lace, adapted from Shirley Conran's bestseller, drowned in sex, affairs, and shock lines, including the infamous question about motherhood that everyone remembered. Reviewers were already starting to label her as another disposable VHS-era sex figure. All of this was happening while she was quietly auditioning for more grounded work. Dramas, stage roles, parts that did not ask her to undress, but producers could not unsee what marketing had drilled into them. Bikinis, showers, bedrooms. That was the box, and it was already sealed. She did try to shift the tone. During the height of the teen sex wave, Cates leaned toward projects with heavier emotions and more dialogue. Lace gave her vulnerability, abandonment, pregnancy, and revenge. For once, she had room to speak, yet the promos betrayed her. Network ads and magazine spreads led with lingerie shots and sultry close-ups, selling it like late-night soap rather than drama. Years later, Bodies, Rest, and Motion in 1993 earned her strong notices for playing a worn-down young woman searching for meaning. But the film barely reached audiences. Without the promise of skin, distributors seemed unsure how to sell her at all. Again and again, when she pushed toward grounded stories, the marketing dragged her back toward sex appeal, quietly undoing the shift she was trying to make. Over time, that gap between who she was and how she was sold left a mark. She later described much of her work as feeling like the same thing repeated, admitting she sometimes took roles simply for the money. Coming from someone once crowned the ultimate teen fantasy, the line landed flat and tired. Even today, retrospectives on the Fast Times bikini scene point out how unnecessary it feels compared to the rest of the film, which uses nudity sparingly and with purpose. By the early 1990s, after marrying Kevin Kline in 1989 and having 2 children, she began turning away. She declined roles like Father of the Bride and chose a quiet Manhattan life instead of repeating typecast parts. In a strange way, the only way she could take control of her image was by stepping out of view altogether. Then there was Gremlins. When it opened on June 8, 1984, she was just 20 years old, and the shift was immediate. The film earned more than $148 million worldwide on a budget of about $11 million and became the biggest hit of her career overnight. She played Kate Beringer, a small-town bartender in Kingston Falls, opposite Zach Galligan, in a movie produced by Steven Spielberg and directed by Joe Dante. 2 years earlier, she had been frozen in slow motion in a red bikini. Now she wore chunky sweaters, waitress uniforms, and stood inside a Christmas Eve disaster instead of a fantasy sequence. Over time, critics and audiences began pointing to Gremlins, not Private School or Paradise, as the moment her image finally widened. Halfway through the film came the scene no one expected. Kate explains why she hates Christmas, calmly telling a story about being 9 years old and waiting for her father to come home on Christmas Eve. Days pass. The house grows cold. Then she smells something from the fireplace and discovers his body stuck in the chimney, dressed as Santa, having broken his neck trying to surprise them. The camera does not cut away. Cates plays it without tears, without drama, letting the horror sit quietly in her voice. For a 1984 PG film, it was shocking. That monologue later became the moment many viewers realized Gremlins was darker than its marketing and that Cates could handle strange, risky material without blinking. 6 years later, Gremlins 2 arrived in June 1990. This time, the chaos moved into a towering New York skyscraper owned by Daniel Clamp, a loud mashup of media power and ego. Cates returned as Kate, now navigating television studios, labs, and talk shows as the Gremlins turned the building into live broadcast madness. The sequel leaned into self-awareness. At one point, Kate begins another tragic holiday story, only for Billy to cut her off, gently mocking how odd the first monologue had been. The film earned far less than the original and split critics at the time, but its long-term cult life and strong Rotten Tomatoes score kept her visible without leaning on nudity or sex comedy. Between the two Gremlins films, she worked steadily, yet nothing cut through culture the same way. Lace left behind one of television's most quoted lines, later voted the greatest in TV history by TV Guide in 1993, but it lived mostly as trivia. Films like Date with an Angel, Bright Lights Big City, Shag, and Heart of Dixie struggled to stick, often praised for effort, but quickly forgotten. Gremlins, meanwhile, played every December on television. Toys, posters, and VHS tapes kept circulating. For millions of viewers, Phoebe Cates became Kate with Gizmo, no matter what else she did. Her career burned fast and then softened. Official filmographies show intense activity from 1982 through Princess Caribou in 1994, then near silence. Aside from a small role in the anniversary party in 2001 and a voice return in a 2015 game, she stepped away. Biographies note how she had been pushed into nude scenes at 17 and marketed as fantasy before she fully understood the cost. After marrying Kevin Kline and having children in 1991 and 1994, she chose carefully. If a role was not worth leaving home, she said no. By 2005, she had opened her boutique, Blue Tree, on Madison Avenue, trading sets and spotlights for daily routines and privacy. Phoebe Cates met Kevin Kline at a strange turning point, back when she was still a teenager and Hollywood was just starting to pull her in. It was 1982 to 1983 during auditions for The Big Chill. She was around 19. He was 16 years older, already trained at Juilliard, already a Tony winner, already carrying that stage confidence that fills a room before the actor even speaks. She did not get the role, so it could have ended right there. But then, 2 years later in 1985, their paths crossed again in New York at the Public Theater. And this time, Kevin did not treat it like a casual moment. He wanted her, and he made it clear in a way that felt bold even by theater standards. He even hired her former assistant just to secure a date with her, like he was building a bridge to her life, one plank at a time. Later, Phoebe joked about her first impression of him. After seeing him in Sophie's Choice in 1982, she assumed he was gay, partly because he came from theater, seemed so clean, and used his hands a lot in that movie. It sounds funny, but it also shows how quickly she was watching him, studying him, trying to place him. And then the feeling shifted into something more real, something that did not need guessing. So when they married on March 5, 1989, it did not look like a typical Hollywood move. It was the same year he won his second Tony Award, yet they did not run toward a Los Angeles mansion and a bigger spotlight. Instead, they bought a brownstone on Manhattan's Upper East Side. That choice mattered. It set their life in New York, closer to theater and routine, and farther from the studio orbit that keeps pulling actors back into the same machine. Then came the part that explains almost everything that followed. They wanted children, and they made a deal that sounded simple on the surface, but was hard to keep in real life. Kevin said in a 1998 Playboy interview that they would alternate work schedules, so one parent would always be home. When it was her turn to work, he would stay with the kids. When it was his turn, she would. It was clean on paper. It looked fair. And yet, the story people kept noticing was how often the balance tilted in one direction. Offers kept coming for Phoebe after Fast Times at Ridgemont High in 1982 and Gremlins in 1984, and even later. But again and again, she chose home over months of shooting. That meant turning down checks that could hit six figures, and turning down the kind of visibility that keeps an actor's name alive in public. Over time, their pact started to feel one-sided, not because Kevin demanded it, but because Phoebe kept choosing the same thing, quietly, over and over. The anchor, the one who stayed. By 1991, her son Owen was born, and she was only 28. She had already been the face of two major 1980s franchises, Fast Times at Ridgemont High in 1982, Gremlins in 1984, and then Gremlins Second the New Batch in 1990. In 1994, her daughter Greta was born, and that same year she starred in Princess Caribou, playing the title role opposite Kevin. Normally, a lead role like that at 31 becomes leverage. It becomes a push into more films, bigger deals, the next wave. But instead, after Princess Caribou, she stepped away from major film work to raise Owen and Greta. While other actresses were fighting ageism and chasing the few lead roles available, Phoebe made a different decision. She retired from the heavy cycle before she turned 35. What could have become a 30-year screen career compressed into about 12 busy years, from 1982 to 1994. And then, the silence started to look permanent. That is why her appearance in the anniversary party in 2001 surprised people so much. It looked like the first step back, a comeback. Yet the reason was smaller and more personal. The film was written, directed, and produced by her longtime friend and Fast Times co-star Jennifer Jason Leigh, along with Alan Cumming, and it was shot on digital video in just 19 days in Los Angeles. Phoebe played Sophia Gold, a former actress who left the business to raise children, which felt almost like her real life drifting onto the screen. And the truth behind it stayed simple. She did it as a favor to a friend, not as a return to the industry. Even her family was pulled into it, since Kevin and their kids appear in the film too, making the whole thing feel less like a career relaunch and more like a home movie reunion with a Cannes premiere attached. When it premiered and then opened in the United States in June 2001, she did not chase another role. She just went back to New York. After that, the credits almost disappear. For more than a decade, she did not take another on-screen job. Then, in 2015, there was a tiny echo of the past when she voiced a Lego version of her Gremlins character Kate Beringer in the video game Lego Dimensions. It was more like an Easter egg than a comeback, a quick nod to 1984 that let fans smile and then move on. No talk show tours followed, no judging panels, no big reboot as the nostalgic mom. She did not take the usual path that the industry offers to icons who once filled screens. Instead, she built a different kind of second act. In 2005, she opened a boutique called Blue Tree at 1288 Madison Avenue between 91st and 92nd Street. A narrow three-story place, packed with carefully chosen objects. Over time, it grew into a mix of Japanese toys, hand-painted ceramics, housewares, specialty foods, clothing, and limited-run designs. The work became about visiting small vendors and art fairs, deciding what belongs, curating the mood. People described the store like a well-traveled friend's living room more than a Madison Avenue business. And that detail fits, because it matches the way she always seemed to lean toward warm conversation instead of Hollywood distance. There is also something quietly poetic in how the whole thing flips her old life. In the 1980s, her face sold perfume and fashion in magazines like 17 and British Vogue, and she appeared on 17's cover 4 times. Back then, she was the product being sold. At Blue Tree, she became the one doing the choosing. Instead of posing for ads, she hunts down small batch scents, niche candles, and artisan soaps from under the radar makers who could never afford national campaigns. It is less about being watched and more about watching, judging, selecting. In a strange way, it is control. A calm kind of control she never fully had when studios decided her costumes, her angles, and how the world would freeze her in one famous image. And the most surprising part is how often customers do not even recognize her. People will talk with a soft-spoken woman about children's books or vinyl records, pay for a gift, and only later realize who was standing right there. That anonymity lets her live in 2 timelines at once. In one, she is still the 1980s memory, the red swimsuit scene from Fast Times at Ridgemont High that became one of the most rewound moments in VHS history. In the other, she is simply the owner of a neighborhood shop who knows what regulars like and what their kids might want for a birthday. Even when she appears on camera now, it stays low-key. In 2013, a short promotional video for Blue Tree showed up online, and people called it her last acting role because it looked like a tiny, self-aware commercial. She moves around the shop, shows items, talks like herself, and that is the point. The store is real. The life is real. The line between performance and reality gets blurry, but only because she chose a life where she does not have to perform at all. Through all of this, the marriage kept holding. They began with that audition meeting in 1982, then reconnected in 1985, married on March 5, 1989, and stayed out of the public scandal loop while raising 2 children in Manhattan. By 2025, that is 36 years of marriage. Kevin was born in 1947. Phoebe was born in 1963. That 16-year gap never became the headline, because the bigger headline was what they built quietly, and how deliberately Phoebe kept choosing the same direction, even when fame kept offering her another map. She turned 62 on July 16, 2025, more than 40 years after Fast Times hit cinemas on August 13, 1982, and locked her into pop culture as an image that never ages. Yet real life does. Recent fan posts in July 2023 and July 2025 show her in simple clothes, with natural gray streaks, smile lines, and a softer, quieter look. The shock people feel is not just the passage of time. It is the fact that she was allowed to age off camera, without turning her face into a project. On Reddit and nostalgia groups, people still call her ageless, still stunning, still cute, and then someone will mention that younger staff in their 20s have no idea who they are serving when she walks in with Kevin. That detail says everything. The world froze her at 18, but she stepped out of the freeze, built a life that did not need applause, and kept walking.